Soft piano music seems to drift through the quiet air of memory, gentle and almost hesitant, as if it too is afraid of disturbing what lies buried beneath years of routine and silence. And the narrator's voice enters calmly, reflectively, not in a rush, but with the patience of someone who understands that some stories must be unfolded slowly, saying that sometimes life does not announce its turning points with thunder or drama. Sometimes it whispers instead, slipping a single moment into an ordinary day, a folded piece of paper into an overlooked corner, a truth into a place where you were never meant to look, and that a single letter, unopened for decades, can quietly wait for the right hands, the right heart, and the right moment to change everything you thought you knew about love, family, and yourself. And as the music fades into the background, the story settles into the life of Clara Bennett, 64 years old, widowed, steady, and outwardly calm. A woman who has learned how to make peace with quiet mornings and long afternoons, who has organized her grief the same way she organizes her kitchen drawers, neatly, practically, with a sense of acceptance that comes from knowing life rarely offers explanations even when it offers memories. And Clara's days have become predictable in a way that once felt comforting and now sometimes feels hollow. Her mornings beginning with tea brewed just the way Thomas used to like it, even though he has been gone for 3 years. Her afternoons filled with small domestic rituals like folding laundry that no longer carries his scent or watering plants that grow faithfully by the window where he once stood reading the newspaper. And though she does not say it out loud, there are moments when the house itself seems to remember him more vividly than she allows herself to. The creak of the stairs, the worn arm of the sofa, the faint indentation on the mattress that has never quite disappeared. And it is on one of these unremarkable afternoons, when the sky outside is pale and undecided and the world feels suspended between seasons, that Clara decides to clean the attic. Not because she feels particularly motivated, but because she has learned that motion is sometimes the only cure for stillness. And as she climbs the narrow steps, each one echoing slightly under her careful weight, she does not expect anything more than dust and forgotten boxes, old holiday decorations, children's school projects, and relics of a life already lived. Yet the attic carries a different kind of air, heavier, thicker, as though it has been holding its breath for years. And Clara moves slowly, brushing her hands along cardboard edges, opening boxes filled with photo albums she has already seen 100 times, pausing occasionally to smile at a familiar face frozen in time, Thomas young and laughing at the beach, Thomas holding their newborn daughter with an expression that still makes her chest tighten, Thomas standing behind her at a family barbecue with his arms wrapped loosely around her waist, protective and effortless. And she allows herself these brief pauses but does not linger, because she knows how easily nostalgia can turn into longing, and longing can turn into pain. And then, tucked behind a stack of old books with cracked spines and yellowed pages, she notices an envelope, cream-colored, slightly bent, with handwriting that is unfamiliar yet careful, addressed not to her but to Thomas, her late husband, the name written clearly, deliberately, as though the writer wanted no mistake. And Clara feels a small tightening in her chest, not fear exactly, but surprise, because she knows every letter Thomas ever received, or at least she thought she did, and the envelope is sealed, untouched, as if time itself decided to leave it undisturbed. And for a moment she considers putting it back, telling herself it is none of her business anymore, that whatever it contains belongs to a past that has already ended. But curiosity has a way of speaking softly and persistently, and before she can stop herself, she is sitting on an old wooden trunk, the letter resting in her hands, heavier than it should be, and when she opens it, The paper inside crackles slightly, protesting after years of silence. And the words unfold slowly, deliberately. Written by a woman named Isabel, a name Clara has never heard spoken in Thomas's voice. And the letter is not dramatic, not scandalous in its language, but it is intimate, unmistakably so, filled with affection and memory and longing. Isabel writes of a time long ago, of walks taken and conversations shared, of a connection that felt rare and meaningful, of a love that was never meant to last but never fully faded either. And Clara's breath becomes shallow as she reads, her eyes moving across sentences that reveal a part of Thomas she never knew, a chapter of his life that existed before her yet somehow feels painfully present now. And memories begin to intrude, uninvited and vivid. Their first meeting at a mutual friend's gathering where Thomas spilled his drink and laughed at himself before offering her an awkward apology. Their early dates filled with nervous excitement. The way he looked at her during their wedding vows as though the rest of the world had momentarily ceased to exist. And now these memories collide with the words on the page, creating a confusing, almost dizzying blend of love and betrayal and understanding and grief. And Clara feels herself tremble, not because the letter diminishes what she and Thomas shared, but because it complicates it. Because it introduces a truth that does not erase their life together yet refuses to stay silent. And she thinks of the nights after Thomas died when she lay awake replaying their years together, believing she knew every corner of his heart. And now she wonders what else he carried quietly, what he chose not to share, and whether love can be both complete and unfinished at the same time. And as she sits there surrounded by dust and shadows, Clara allows herself to cry, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the restrained sorrow of someone who has lived long enough to know that tears do not always demand attention. They simply need space, and she stays there for a long while, the letter folded loosely in her hand, her thoughts moving between past and present. Between the woman she was and the woman she is now. Between the certainty she once felt and the questions she never thought she would have to ask. And when she finally stands and descends the stairs, the attic behind her feels different, as though it has released something it had been holding on to. And Clara returns to her daily routine, outwardly unchanged but inwardly unsettled, replaying moments from her marriage with new awareness, recalling Thomas's occasional silences, the way he sometimes stared out the window lost in thought, the way he always encouraged honesty yet kept this one truth to himself. And she wonders if knowing this earlier would have changed anything, or if some loves are simply meant to remain layered and complex. And that night, as she lies in bed listening to the familiar quiet of the house, Clara realizes that grief does not move in a straight line, that even years later it can find new paths, uncover new questions, and that the past, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it, not to hurt you, but to remind you that love, in all its forms, is rarely simple. The days following Clara's discovery move with an unsettling slowness, as though time itself has decided to watch her more closely. And she finds that even the simplest tasks now carry a faint echo of the letter's presence. The kettle whistling too sharply, the ticking clock sounding louder than before. Her thoughts drifting back to Isabel's handwriting at odd moments when she least expects it. And though she tells herself she has no obligation to do anything with this information, that it changes nothing about the life she lived or the love she shared with Thomas, a quiet restlessness settles into her chest, the kind that does not scream but refuses to be ignored. And it is Lily, her granddaughter, who notices first. Lily, with her perceptive eyes and gentle persistence, Lily, who has grown up watching her grandmother navigate loss with dignity and who now senses a subtle shift in her presence, the way Clara stares too long at nothing, the way she forgets small things like whether she has already sweetened her tea, and one afternoon, as they sit together at the kitchen table surrounded by the comfortable clutter of family life, Lily finally speaks, asking softly if something is bothering her, and Clara hesitates, instinctively protective of the truth, unsure whether sharing it will lighten the burden or make it heavier. But Lily's expression holds no judgment, only concern, and so Clara allows herself to speak, not all at once, not in dramatic confession, but slowly, explaining that she found a letter, that it was written long ago, that it revealed something unexpected about Thomas's past, and Lily listens without interruption, her youth offering not naivete but openness, and when Clara finishes, Lily reaches across the table and places her hand over her grandmother's, grounding her in the present, and says that maybe understanding the past does not mean rewriting it. Maybe it just means seeing it clearly, and that sometimes answers do not come unless you are willing to ask the questions. And Clara is struck by the quiet wisdom in Lily's words, realizing that grief has shaped both of them in different ways, one through loss, the other through witnessing it. And Lily suggests gently that if the letter has stirred something unresolved, Clara deserves the chance to understand it fully, not for anyone else, but for herself. And this thought lingers long after Lily leaves, following Clara into the evening where she sits alone with the letter once more, rereading Isabel's words not with the initial shock of discovery but with a more measured curiosity, noticing details she missed before, the tenderness, the restraint, the acceptance woven into the lines, and she wonders about the woman who wrote it, about the life she lived after Thomas, about whether the love described in those pages was a wound or a memory softened by time. And driven by a need for context, Clara reaches out to Daniel, an old friend of Thomas's from his younger years, someone she has not spoken to in a long time but remembers as kind and honest. And their conversation unfolds cautiously at first, filled with pleasantries and shared recollections, until Clara finally brings herself to mention the letter, and there is a pause on the other end of the line, not one of guilt or evasion, but of reflection, and Daniel admits that he knew about Isabel, that Thomas had spoken of her once or twice in the past, not as a regret, but as an important chapter that shaped him. And Daniel explains that Thomas and Isabel shared a brief but meaningful connection before Clara entered his life. A relationship that ended not because it lacked depth, but because Thomas recognized what he wanted for the future, and that when he met Clara, he chose her fully, decisively, without hesitation. And hearing this does not erase Clara's confusion, but it reframes it, allowing her to see Thomas not as someone who withheld love, but as someone who understood its complexity, who carried his past with honesty even if he did not always share it. And Daniel goes on to mention something unexpected, that he recently encountered Isabel, now elderly, living quietly and alone, and that she spoke of Thomas with respect and fondness but without bitterness. And this revelation unsettles Clara in a different way, stirring not jealousy but empathy, a recognition that while her own life with Thomas was full and shared, Isabel's connection to him existed largely in memory. And Clara wrestles with this new awareness, torn between the instinct to protect her own sense of history and the pull of compassion for another woman whose story has been running parallel to hers all these years. And as she reflects on Daniel's words, she begins to see Thomas's life not as a series of hidden compartments but as a continuous journey, one that led him to her but did not erase what came before. And this understanding does not diminish her love, but rather deepens it, allowing her to accept that the man she married was shaped by experiences she did not witness and yet chose her every day thereafter. And still, questions remain, not accusatory ones, but human ones. And Clara finds herself wondering what closure truly means, whether it comes from answers or from acceptance, and whether reaching out to Isabel would bring peace or reopen wounds best left undisturbed. And in the quiet moments before sleep, Clara reflects on her own life, on the ways she has changed since Thomas's death, on the space that loss has carved out within her. And she realizes that the letter has not only revealed something about Thomas, but something about herself, her capacity to feel deeply even now, her willingness to confront uncertainty rather than retreat from it. And though she does not yet know what she will do, she senses that this chapter is not meant to remain closed, that some truths surface not to disrupt the present but to complete the past. And with Lily's encouragement echoing in her mind and Daniel's honesty offering a fragile sense of reassurance, Clara takes a small but significant step, deciding that understanding does not mean betrayal, that compassion does not negate loyalty, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is allow themselves to listen, even when the story they hear is not the one they expected. As Clara moves deeper into the quiet aftermath of her decision to seek understanding rather than retreat into silence, the emotional weight of the letter begins to ripple outward, touching the rest of her family in subtle but unmistakable ways. And though she has not yet spoken Isabel's name aloud to anyone beyond Daniel and Lily, her children, Margaret and Evan, sensed a shift in her presence with the intuition that only comes from years of shared history. Noticing how their mother seems distant during conversations, how her laughter arrives a moment too late, how she pauses as if listening to something only she can hear. And it is Margaret, the elder of the two, practical and protective by nature, who finally addresses it one evening as they sit together after dinner, the familiar comfort of routine offering a fragile sense of safety, asking gently but directly whether this has something to do with their father. And Clara feels a tightening in her chest at the sound of Thomas's name spoken so plainly, realizing that no matter how much time passes, some names never lose their gravity, and she answers cautiously, admitting that she found something unexpected among Thomas's belongings, something that stirred memories and questions she did not anticipate. And Margaret's expression shifts instantly, concern sharpening into defensiveness, while Evan, quieter but equally attentive, leans forward as though bracing for impact, and Clara chooses her words carefully, revealing the existence of the letter without yet naming its author, describing it as a connection from Thomas's past that she never knew about. And the reaction is immediate, Margaret's voice tightening as she asks why this matters now, why Clara would open herself up to pain after all these years, while Evan worries aloud about strangers from the past intruding on the family's sense of stability. And Clara listens without interruption, recognizing that their fear does not come from distrust but from love, from a desire to protect the image of their father and the emotional well-being of their mother. And when she finally speaks, her voice is steady but layered with emotion, explaining that she is not searching for trouble or trying to rewrite history, that she simply needs closure for herself, a chance to understand rather than speculate, to honor the life she shared with Thomas by seeing it honestly and completely. And she reminds them of the man their father was, thoughtful, complex, capable of deep feeling. And she asks them to trust her judgment, to believe that this journey is not about diminishing what they had as a family, but about reaffirming it. And though Margaret remains visibly uneasy and Evan skeptical, There is a shared understanding beneath their reactions, a recognition that their mother has always navigated life with quiet strength, and that perhaps this is another moment where she must do so again. And later that night, as Clara sits alone in the living room surrounded by the soft glow of familiar lamps, she allows herself to drift into memories of Thomas that rise unbidden, not as fragmented flashes but as a gentle montage of shared life, recalling the way he used to leave her handwritten notes in unexpected places, small declarations of love tucked into coat pockets or slipped beneath her pillow, the sound of his laughter echoing through the house during family gatherings, the way he held her hand during difficult moments without saying a word. And these memories remind her that love is not invalidated by the existence of what came before it, that their marriage was built not on ignorance but on choice. And as she reflects, Clara recognizes that part of her children's discomfort mirrors her own initial reaction, a fear that uncovering hidden truths might fracture the foundation of what they believe to be solid. Yet she also knows that foundations built on honesty, even delayed honesty, are stronger than those sustained by silence. And over the following days, tension lingers in small ways, conversations trailing off too quickly, glances exchanged when Clara steps out of the room. But there is also an undercurrent of respect, an unspoken acknowledgement that their mother's need for understanding is valid. And Lily, sensing the strain, becomes a quiet bridge between generations, offering reassurance to her mother and uncle while supporting her grandmother's resolve. And through it all, Clara continues to reflect on her marriage, recalling moments when Thomas encouraged openness and forgiveness, moments when he spoke of life as a journey shaped by choices rather than regrets. And she wonders if perhaps this final act of understanding is one he would have wanted her to embrace. And as she sits at the kitchen table one morning, the letter once again opened before her, Clara realizes that the act of reading it no longer feels like an intrusion, but like a conversation that was simply delayed. And she begins to consider what meeting Isabel might mean, not as a confrontation, but as an exchange between two women who loved the same man in different ways. And this thought no longer fills her with dread but with a cautious sense of purpose. And while her children remain wary, Clara senses that their resistance is softening, replaced by a quiet trust in her ability to navigate this unfamiliar territory. And in the stillness of the evening, she makes a decision, not impulsively, but with the clarity that comes from reflection, understanding that closure does not always arrive uninvited, that sometimes it requires courage, and that facing the past, rather than diminishing the present, can illuminate it. And with this realization, Clara prepares herself for the next step, aware that whatever comes of it, she will meet it with the same grace that has carried her through loss, love, and the long, complicated beauty of a life fully lived. The morning of the meeting arrives with a quiet inevitability, the kind that does not announce itself with nerves or panic but settles gently into Clara's awareness as she wakes, her thoughts already arranged around the knowledge of what the day holds. And as she moves through her routine, choosing her clothes carefully, smoothing the familiar lines of her reflection in the mirror, she is struck by how different anticipation feels at this stage of life, less charged with fear, more infused with intention. And when she finally steps outside into the mild air and makes her way to the cafe where she and Isabel have agreed to meet, Clara feels not the rush of confrontation but the steady presence of resolve. And the cafe itself is quiet and unassuming, a place chosen not for significance but for neutrality, its muted colors and gentle hum offering a space where two lives can intersect without spectacle. And Isabel is already there when Clara arrives, seated near the window, her posture upright yet relaxed, her appearance marked by age but also by a dignity that speaks of resilience. And for a moment Clara hesitates at the threshold, observing this woman who has existed only as a name and a voice on paper until now, and she feels a surprising absence of hostility, replaced instead by curiosity and a quiet compassion. And when Isabel looks up and meets her gaze, recognition flickers across her face, not of familiarity but of understanding, as though she has been waiting for this moment in her own way. And their initial exchange is cautious, polite, marked by the careful distance of two people aware of the significance of what they are about to share. But as they sit together, the space between them begins to soften, filled not by tension but by shared humanity. And Isabel speaks first, her voice gentle and measured, acknowledging the letter and expressing her gratitude that Clara chose to read it rather than discard it. And Clara listens, attentive and composed. And when she responds, it is not with accusation but with honesty, explaining that she needed to understand, not to judge. And as the conversation unfolds, they begin to share memories of Thomas, not competitively but collaboratively, each contributing fragments of a life that shaped them both. Isabel recalling their youthful connection, the conversations that stretched late into the night, the sense of possibility that defined that time, and Clara offering her own recollections, the years of partnership, the shared responsibilities, the quiet joys and inevitable challenges of building a life together. And through these exchanges, a pattern emerges, not of rivalry but of continuity, and Isabel speaks of her enduring care for Thomas, admitting that while their paths diverged, he remained a significant presence in her thoughts. And Clara, rather than feeling diminished by this admission, finds herself acknowledging the truth of it, understanding that love does not operate on a principle of exclusivity in memory. And when Isabel says that Clara was Thomas's life, that his choice was clear and unwavering, Clara feels a release, a gentle untying of the knot that has tightened within her since discovering the letter, and their conversation shifts, moving beyond Thomas to touch on their own lives, the years that followed, the paths taken and the moments of solitude endured. And Clara is struck by the parallels between them. Two women who loved deeply and lived fully, each shaped by their connection to the same man but defined by their own choices. And as tears surface, they are not bitter but cleansing, accompanied by laughter that surprises them both. Laughter born of recognition and shared experience. And in this moment, Clara realizes that the love they both held for Thomas was never in competition, that it existed in layers, each belonging to its own time and context, and that acknowledging this does not fracture her identity but affirms it. And when the meeting draws to a close, there is no dramatic farewell, no grand resolution, only a quiet sense of completion. And as they part, Clara feels lighter. Not because answers have erased complexity, but because understanding has replaced uncertainty. And as she steps back into the world beyond the caf, she carries with her not the weight of betrayal but the clarity of truth, aware that some stories do not end with a single revelation but with the courage to listen. And as she makes her way home, Clara reflects on the journey that led her here, recognizing that this meeting was not about Thomas alone, but about her own growth, her willingness to confront the unknown, and her capacity to find peace in complexity. And she knows that while the past cannot be changed, it can be integrated, woven into the fabric of the present in a way that honors all who were part of it. And with this understanding, Clara returns home, ready to re-engage with her life and her family with a renewed sense of self, carrying the quiet assurance that love, in all its forms, is resilient, expansive, and enduring. Clara's return home is not marked by any visible transformation. No sudden brightness or dramatic shift in the rhythm of her life. Yet something within her has undeniably settled, as though a long-standing tension she had learned to live with has finally loosened its grip. And as she steps inside the familiar walls of her house, she notices how unchanged everything appears and yet how differently she feels moving through it. The room's no longer echoing with unanswered questions but filled instead with a quiet sense of resolution. And in the days that follow, this subtle clarity begins to influence her interactions. Her conversations warmer, her presence more fully anchored in the moment. And Lily notices it first, remarking one afternoon that her grandmother seems lighter, more at ease, and Clara smiles at this, understanding that peace does not always announce itself loudly, that sometimes it simply reveals itself through small gestures, through the willingness to laugh without restraint or to sit in silence without discomfort. And as she reconnects with her family, Clara finds herself more open, more engaged, sharing stories from the past not with longing but with gratitude, baking with her grandchildren and allowing the mess and laughter to unfold without concern, listening to Margaret and Evan with renewed patience, their earlier worries easing as they sense their mother's renewed stability. And though she does not recount every detail of her meeting with Isabel, Clara shares enough to reassure them, explaining that understanding does not weaken love but strengthens it, that the truth, even when delayed, can be a source of healing rather than harm, and over time, the family settles back into its familiar patterns, enriched rather than disrupted by this chapter. And Clara herself begins to explore small joys she once postponed, volunteering at a local community center, reconnecting with old friends whose calls she once returned out of obligation rather than enthusiasm, rediscovering interests that had quietly faded during the years of caregiving and grief. And through these moments, she realizes that honoring the past does not mean remaining bound to it, that life continues to offer opportunities for connection and meaning regardless of age or circumstance. And one evening, as she sits by the window with a cup of tea, watching the world move gently beyond the glass, Clara reflects on the journey she has taken, from discovery to doubt to understanding, and she feels a profound sense of gratitude, not only for the love she shared with Thomas, but for the resilience that allowed her to face uncertainty with courage. And when she finally opens the scrapbook she has been assembling, carefully pinning Thomas's letters alongside photographs and mementos, she does so with intention, preserving memories not as relics to be mourned but as chapters of a story that continues to shape her. And as she closes the book and gazes out the window, contemplative yet content, the narrator's voice returns, gentle and reflective, reminding us that life is rarely tidy, that secrets from the past may surface when we least expect them, but they do not define us, that love is messy, beautiful and enduring, and that sometimes understanding where we have been allows us to embrace where we are going. And as the final words appear on the screen, echoing the quiet truth Clara has come to embody, we are reminded that the heart remembers, the heart forgives, and the heart continues.